For those of you that don't know me, I'm Clayton Rose. We've got the room here, and we have the virtual room. We have folks that are live streaming in. Welcome to everyone. And it is great to begin to crawl back into something that resembles normal again. I am exceedingly pleased to be able to welcome back to Bowdoin College Arthur Brooks. Arthur is the William Henry Bloomberg Professor of the Practice of Public Leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School and a Professor of Management Practice at the Harvard Business School. Before joining Harvard in 2019, he spent 10 years as the president of the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, one of the world's leading think tanks. In 2019 as well, I don't know where it ranks versus Harvard, you can tell us later, Arthur, he was our inaugural Joseph McKeen Visiting Fellow, and he joined us on campus, as many of you know, in the fall of that year to engage with classes, with student groups, with the broader Bowdoin community, on a range of topics, including earned success, human dignity, moral philosophy, ideological diversity on college campuses, and his work on happiness. His planned trip here in the spring of 2020 was, of course, canceled because of COVID, and I'm grateful, we're grateful, Arthur, that you found the time to be back for the final leg of your visit as a visiting fellow at Bowdoin College. I should also add that Arthur was here in 2017. He joined Frank Bruni, the New York Times columnist, in a discussion that was moderated by our own Jean Yarborough. I don't know if Jean is here tonight, but or here, probably here, on how to engage with those with whom you disagree, which was part of a larger project that we had going on at the time. Arthur is the author of 12 books, including national bestsellers, Love Your Enemies and The Conservative Heart, and his latest book, From Strength to Strength, which was just released, is a New York Times #1 bestseller. He's a columnist for The Atlantic, the host of a podcast, How to Build a Happy Life, and the subject of a 2019 documentary, The Pursuit, which Variety named, a magazine that I read often, as one of the best documentaries in Netflix in August of 2019. I've seen it, Julianne and I have seen it. I recommend it to all of you. Arthur began his career as a classical musician, a French horn player. He left college at 19, touring and recording first with the Annapolis Brass Quintet, and then later with the City Orchestra of Barcelona. In his late 20s, while still performing, he returned to studies, earning his BA in a distance learning program at Thomas Edison State College, and then an MA in economics at Florida Atlantic University. And at 31, he left music professionally, and earned a PhD in public policy analysis from the Rand Graduate School. He then spent 10 years at Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs and became a full professor in his 7th year out of graduate school, occupying the Louis A. Banel Chair in Business and Government. He was a prolific writer and scholar, as well as being a teacher at Syracuse. And in 2009, he became the 11th president of AEI, holding the Beth and Ravenel Curry Chair in Free Enterprise. Under his leadership, the Institute more than doubled its annual revenues, deepened its outreach to leaders across the ideological spectrum, and expanded its research portfolio to include work on poverty, happiness, and human potential. And during this period, he was selected as one of Fortune magazine's 50 World's Greatest Leaders. Was Putin on that list with you at the time? No, okay, all right. And was awarded 6 honorary doctorates. Arthur will be here at Bowdoin for the next 2 days. He'll be engaging with us in a variety of ways. In particular, I encourage you to consider joining us on Friday morning in Lancaster Lounge for a conversation with him facilitated by Eduardo Passos, our Director of Religious and Spiritual Life here. It's entitled Faith, Leadership, and Political Change. We'll be joined by faith leaders from the broader Brunswick community who asked if they could have a session with Arthur and around which this is built during his visit here. There's more information about this on the website, in the calendar section of the website, and where you can sign up for the event. And before introducing Arthur, I want to, and turning the stage over to him, I do want to thank my colleagues at the McKeen Center, Sarah Seams. I've lost track of where anybody is. There's Sarah right there who runs the place. Professor Barry Logan, who couldn't be with us tonight, but is the faculty liaison, and in particular Tom Ancona, who played such an instrumental role in putting all this together, as well as Eduardo, and I know you're in the room as well, Eduardo, somewhere over there. But thank you all for the fantastic work that you've done to make all of this happen. The title of Arthur's talk this evening is Life and Love After COVID. I love the after part there, Arthur. That's super optimistic. Thank you. Arthur, it is a great pleasure to welcome you back to Bowdoin.
Thank you. Thank you, Clayton, and thanks to all of you. What a delight it is to be with you. Thanks to my friends at the McKeen Center, Tom and Sarah, especially Tom, who made it possible to, even though I'm on the road, to get to Ash Wednesday Mass. That was really a wonderful thing, and I feel quite at home here. You heard from Clayton that this is not my first visit. On the contrary, I was here in 2019, which was supposed to be the first visit of 2 semesters consecutively. And we didn't, any of us, have any concept that we were going to be waiting this long for my second visit or for anything we would be doing in person. The fact that this is extraordinary that we're in person after this much time is something that was really obviously unanticipated. Before that, I had been here at this beautiful place at this wonderful college in 2017, but that actually wasn't the first time that I taught at Bowdoin College. The first time I came here was in 1986. As a 22-year-old, I was playing chamber music in the summer at the Bowdoin Chamber Music Festival. I was also teaching the French horn there. I had no idea, if you had told me that many years hence I would be here talking about happiness after COVID, I would have said, what, after what? And you never know the path that life is going to take you. So thank you for having me. And for all of you who are watching this in the live stream, thank you for joining us as well. You're with us in our hearts. So I want to talk to you not just about COVID. I want to talk to you about something that we all care about, and what is really the focus of my work as a scholar and what I teach at Harvard University. People often ask, where do you teach? I say, I teach at the Harvard Business School. And they say, well, what, marketing, finance, supply chain management, something practical like that? I say, no, I teach happiness. I say, you're kidding. I say, no, that's actually true. As a matter of fact, I finished my semester today. It is the most oversubscribed class at the Harvard Business School, not because of me, but because we need more skills in the art and science of human happiness. Now, it wasn't that long ago that I dedicated myself to this as I'm trained as a social scientist. I'm trained in behavioral social science, and there's a lot of things you can look at with those skills, the quantitative skills, the toolkit that we all use for all the things that social scientists use. But it was some years ago that I decided to dedicate myself to the topic of human happiness. The reason was not because I just wanted to be happier, although I do, and you do too. It was because I think that there's a lot of suffering in our world that goes undetected, and sometimes from the people that you would least suspect. I want to tell you about an experience that I had that set me on this trajectory. Not about COVID per se, but about what I'm really thinking about, which is how we can lift people up and bring them together in bonds of happiness and love. I was on an airplane 8 years ago or so, doing what I always did. I was the president of a think tank in those days, and I was flying around and giving speeches. And for a living, I did about 175 speeches a year, and I had to raise $50 million a year. So it was like year after year after year. It was like running for the Senate and never getting elected was my job. And it was one night that I was on a plane. It was nighttime. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and I was flying across the country from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., and it was dark. And most people were sleeping or watching the movie or something. But I could hear a couple behind me having a conversation. I could tell by their voices it was a man and a woman. I could tell by their voices they were elderly. And I could tell by their conversation that they were probably married because of what they were talking about. I couldn't quite make out the husband's words, but I heard the wife answering him. So I heard him mumble a little bit. And then she said, "Oh, don't say it would be better if you were dead." Whoa. They had my attention. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but what are you going to do? And I heard him mumble a little bit more, and she said, "It's not true that nobody respects you or cares about you or even remembers you." And it went on like this for 20 minutes. He was obviously disconsolate, and she was trying to console him. Well, I was curious. I mean, who is this man? Obviously somebody who hasn't lived up to his expectations. He's disappointed about the trajectory of his life. His life hasn't taken on the form that he hoped it would. Okay. We landed in Washington, D.C. an hour or so later, and all the lights went on and we stood up, and I'll admit it, I was curious. So I turned around, and it was one of the most famous men in the world. This is somebody who will do 10 times more than I will with my life. This is somebody who's rich and famous for events that took place decades ago. a long time ago. And I thought to myself, I've got it all wrong, this model I have of life, that here's what we hear: be successful, make it, bank it, enjoy it forever. That's not right, is it? There are a lot of people who are suffering for a lot of reasons. A lot of people who are privileged, a lot of people who aren't. Happiness doesn't work that way with the world's rewards. We can all learn a lot more about it. And if we learn some of the secrets, we can share it, and we can help each other along the path, along this journey that is each one of our lives. And in so doing, we can remember a truth, a transcendental truth, which is that we're all sisters and brothers, and we all want the same things, and we can all help each other. That's why I teach happiness, because I want to lift people up. I want us all to do that. Well, this has been a good time for us to understand this a little bit better, hasn't it? You know, when I look at the data on happiness, we see unprecedented levels of suffering around us, not just from people who've gotten sick, by the way. Let me give you some recent numbers. On the back end of COVID-19, I talk to mental health professionals constantly because of what I do for a living, and I hear more and more from people who are in the business of mental health talking about this new thing called COVID anxiety syndrome, which is a clinically diagnosed form of anxiety directly related to the COVID-19 virus. Now, maybe you don't suffer from it. That's great. But some people do. And it's a problem in a lot of people's lives. One of the most interesting things that I've seen, one of the most alarming things that I've seen, is ordinarily when you poll the population, you take a core sample across the population for symptoms of major depressive disorder, clinical depression. You can't diagnose it with a blood test. You have to ask people about what's going on in their lives. And ordinarily, you find that somewhere between 9 and 10% of the population has symptoms of major depressive disorder. Right now, 28% of the population. We've never seen anything like this. This has everything to do with what's wrong, especially what's happened with the loneliness, with the isolation. 43% of adults experience what they call high loneliness during lockdowns, and we know, you don't have to be a mental health professional or an expert in happiness to know that loneliness this isolation is an epidemic already, before COVID. We have a great Surgeon General in this country, Vivek Murthy, who's the Surgeon General for President Biden. I've interviewed him on my show before. He was also the Surgeon General for President Obama. And I asked him, what's the biggest public health crisis in America? And it's an obvious answer, COVID. No. He didn't say COVID. He didn't say the opiate crisis. He didn't say gun violence. No. He said loneliness. He said loneliness is the biggest public health crisis that we're facing in the United States today. And that was before the coronavirus lockdowns. Depression, up by over a factor of 3, and the economic impact is just incalculable, and who cares? Because that's really not what we're talking about. We're talking about human suffering. Here's the question, fellow life entrepreneurs. What do you do when there's a problem? Well, you try to solve the problem, to be sure. But if you really want to be entrepreneurial about it, you want to find an opportunity for transcendence. You want to find an opportunity for life to be better from what you learn from the problems. That's what you're trying to do every day as you go over the course of your life. I know you are. We all are. That's what we're trying to do. So let me ask a really hard question. Everybody wants this thing behind us. It's great that you're here in person. You want to take off the mask. We all do. What can we do, notwithstanding the discomfort that we've faced, to see the current period as an opportunity for growth, for change, to have more happiness and love? Is it possible? That's my topic tonight. And if I do my job, I'm going to give you some ideas for your own lives and some ideas on ways that you can help other people. Because at the end of the day, that's all we've got, is each other. Now, it's not crazy for me to talk about taking terrible things and turning them into good things. That's not a terrible thing at all. On the contrary, that's what people do all the time. We hear constantly about the concept of post-traumatic stress, which is a real phenomenon and a real problem, and it must be treated and taken seriously. But much more common than post-traumatic stress, according to all the data, is post-traumatic growth. You hear less about this. But you all know people who said, you know how I found out who I really am as a person? It was that time that, and they tell you about something ghastly in their lives. It's interesting, you know, I have to define happiness a lot because of what I teach. And my students, when I ask them, what's happiness in the first day of class? They say, well, it's the feeling that, and then they tell you something that they feel. Happiness is not a feeling. To say happiness is a feeling is like saying that your Thanksgiving dinner is the smell of the turkey. It doesn't make any sense. The smell of the turkey is an outcome. It's an indication that the turkey dinner exists. And that's the same thing with the feelings of happiness. Happiness is fundamentally made up of three big elements in your life. To be a truly happy person, you need three things in abundance and balance. You need enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose. And here's the funny thing about purpose. You don't get it without suffering. Nobody does. I don't want to suffer. I'm going to assume that you don't either. And I would never recommend that you go looking for suffering, but newsflash, you don't have to go looking for it. It's going to find you. The question is what you do with it. And one of the things that you find always in everybody's life is you say, tell me the moment when you really understood your life's purpose. Almost nobody says it was that week at the beach. People talk about hard things that happened, challenges, scary things, bereavement, loss, and the resiliency that they found within themselves. That's when people talk about the definition of the purpose and meaning in their lives. That's where post-traumatic growth comes from. Even little traumas can lead to big growth. There's a huge literature on this, and post-traumatic growth from everything from life-threatening illnesses to the loss of a loved one. What do you find? In about 90% of the cases, people find that net, they came out better than they went in. It's a beautiful thing about life. And generally speaking, the growth comes in four categories. Number one is they inevitably talk about the fact that their relationships are deeper and richer than they were. And part of the reason is because they're less distracted from the serious business of love. You know, how often have we done that? You fellow workaholic and success addicts. We all have a problem of being distracted from the serious business of our lives. How many times have I chosen the 14th hour of work over the first hour with my kids? I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of substituting stuff for people because it's easier and because of priorities. And people, when they go through a really tough time, they don't make that mistake. And I bet you a bunch of you have reprioritized things in your life around people since the coronavirus worst times have been behind us. Since the worst months of 2020, you savor the relationships with people in a different way. And people always say this in the case of post-traumatic growth. Deeper relationships, more intense relationships of the life that is life, which is love. The second is a superpower that people get with post-traumatic growth, which is they just don't care very much anymore. How many times have you said, I just wish I didn't care what people thought about me? I've thought about that a million times. Now, one of the great consolations of being 57 as opposed to 27, and even more than 17, is I care a lot less. You know, things happen. Your hair falls out. It is what it is, right? And you care less about what people actually think. And that's a great thing, as a matter of fact. But wouldn't it be wonderful if we had less social comparison, if we were less subject to social comparison, if we had a superpower to stop thinking about social comparison all the time? I'd love that. I'd love that. You know how you do it? Trauma. You get threatened, you suffer, and you come at it and you say, I just can't be bothered by what people think about me on the internet. I just can't be bothered with that anymore. Now, can you do it any other way? I don't know. But I do know that people inevitably talk about this as they come out of serious traumas. Third, resilience. You can't get strong biceps unless you work your biceps. And the same thing is true emotionally. People get greater resiliency by surviving traumas, by surviving pain and suffering that they didn't invite, that was unwelcome. And yet, they were subject to it and they survived. And finally, there's heightened spirituality. To walk the spiritual path is one of the great joys of life. And I don't mean that in a traditional or conventional religious sense. On the contrary, one of the things you find about the happiest people, one of the practices of the happiest people, is a life philosophy or faith that actually lets you zoom out on your own life. Why? Because left to your devices, you're going to be completely focused and totally obsessed with a really, really boring thing. Me, 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 me. My stuff, my job, my school, my car, my friends. It's like watching the same television show, the same episode over and over and over again compulsively. And when you can zoom out on the majesty of it, whether it's from reading the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius or a serious meditation and prayer practice, it's just a relief. Many people don't find that spiritual path. They don't find that transcendental path unless they're encouraged to take it because of fear. Fear because of trauma. These are the promises of bad things in our life. And one of the beautiful things about life is that from bad can come good. So here's the question at hand. We didn't like COVID. We didn't choose it. It chose us. Some of you were really afraid. Some of you had real loss. My guess is that some of you had deaths in your family. And maybe you didn't, but you were all alone for a long time, and you didn't like that or want that either. What can we learn from that can make life better right now? And what can we share with others? The way I'm going to answer this is by looking at 3 problems. And the solutions to those problems that we've discovered or that we can discover. The first of which is just loneliness. Talking to people during the lockdowns, people would talk about this intensely uncomfortable and restless state. Some of you remember this, where maybe you were locking in with other people, maybe some of you were by yourself, but most people were actually locking in with other people. 70% of people, 70% of Americans began to work from home, and they would say, it's like, I don't know, I can't sleep, but I'm sleepy, but I can't sleep. I'm feeling restless. I got to get up and walk around. I'm just uncomfortable all the time. Why is that? And furthermore, I feel like there's this pane of glass between me and other people. The weird sort of physical sensations that they couldn't quite explain. Well, it turns out that there is an explanation for that. There is a neurochemical explanation for it, which is called oxytocin. This is known to neuroscientists as the love molecule. And it is a remarkable thing. It's a miracle, actually. It's produced endogenously by the human brain in response to eye contact and touch. Truly a miraculous thing. You all know what it feels like. You see somebody that you love, human contact, especially to see somebody and look them in the eyes that you love and you haven't seen in a long time. That burst of joy that you get, the fireworks inside your head, that's oxytocin. The biggest amount that you ever get in your whole life is when you lay eyes on your newborn infant. Now, evolutionary biologists, they say it's the bonding chemical so that we'll look at a newborn infant and feel bonded to that baby in a way that we wouldn't to any other person. And they explain this so that we won't leave it on the bus or something, right? Neurobiologists are a notoriously unsentimental lot, but it's pure pleasure. I remember reading about oxytocin years ago, and I was still in graduate school, and my wife was pregnant with our first son. He's 23 years old and engaged to be married. Time flies. And when she was pregnant with him, I was reading about this. Oxytocin research was in its infancy in those days, and I was thinking, now that I know about it, I'm not going to get it. I know I'm not going to get it. I missed out because, too much knowledge, kind of. And my wife goes into labor, and they allow me to pretend like I'm helping, which is what they do at the hospital. They basically keep you from fainting on your wife, keep you out of the way, sort of. And my son was born. His name is McKeen. And they put him in my arms, and he looked up at me with his little eyes, and it was like the 4th of July inside my head. Those of you who have kids, you know what I mean? And those of you who are going to have kids, it's amazing. But you also get it from other events, from a long-lost friend, from your beloved, from seeing your parent for the first time after a long time, from going home from college, even somebody that you didn't know you missed. It's oxytocin. It's a miracle. I remember I had the same experience with my second son, who was born 2 years later. And then I had a social science experiment on oxytocin because we adopted our third child. And I was thinking, because I'm a social scientist and we think in these weird ways, so I wonder if it's biological and having to do with blood relationships. And I went to, my daughter's Chinese, and I went to pick her up by myself. I was by myself because my wife was not a citizen. And I had to execute the adoption by myself. And there was this squalling, disoriented 2-year-old. And they put her in my arms, and she grabbed my shirt and looked up at me, and it still happens again. You know, I see her, when I see her, she's in college in Spain now. And when I see her, it's just oxytocin all over again. It's Roman candles. It's the best thing ever. That, my friends, is what we didn't get during COVID-19. It's eye contact, it's touch, it's human contact. That's the reason that we were so bereft and couldn't quite put our finger on that restlessness that we were all feeling. And it was having an almost an alteration in the way that we were seeing the world and that we were seeing life. And so what did we do? We were hungry, we were starving. And so what do we turn to? A substitute. We turn to that. So the world offered us this commercial substitute. We found that social media use was up by about a factor of 6 during the worst part of the coronavirus lockdowns. Now, you can say, why does everybody look on the internet? Why is everybody looking at social media? Because they want oxytocin. Now, they're not neuroscientists or social scientists. They don't know the words for it. And this is in all age groups, by the way. Not everybody. Some people are like, I'm not going to look at that. It's stupid. But even people my age run Twitter all the time. It's like, this is a misery machine. And yet, we're looking on social media just hungry for something. Hungry for something. Here's the problem. It doesn't satisfy. Why? Because oxytocin comes from eye contact and touch. Social media is the junk food of social life. It's the burgers and fries of social life. One of the things that all nutritionists talk about is one of the biggest problems that we have is that we get too many calories per nutrient, effectively, is the way of thinking about it. If you want to lose a bunch of weight, don't actually, to get your caloric needs, but eat nutrient-dense food and don't eat when you're not hungry. I mean, it's hard, but it's pretty simple in its way. Now, what happens if you're lonely? Don't actually get the empty calories of social media because it won't satisfy you. The data are abundantly clear. Any amount of social media above about an hour a day across all platforms, you'll get lonelier by the hour. Lonelier and lonelier while you're trying to get less lonely. We were getting worse made by these technological solutions, these engineering solutions to this dynamic, complex human problem of love. I want oxytocin and you're giving me Facebook? It's just no good. But we didn't know. So how do you get it? What are you going to do? What can you do? And there are solutions. Here's what you can do, and here's what you can share. Reliable oxytocin boosters come from within. Now, eye contact and touch is the only way. So what am I prescribing? I'm prescribing opportunities. Opportunities for us to reconnect with people. When I talk to people and I say, you're really, really lonely, but you live with somebody, and I say, how do you have a conversation with somebody at home? Well, the same way we always did. You know how married couples, I've been married 30 years. You know how married couples have conversations? It's like, I'm looking at this, she's looking at that, we're not talking to each other. We're missing oxytocin because we're not making eye contact. Make purposive eye contact. Here's a better one. If you want to maximize your blood oxytocin levels, you need a 22-second embrace. That's a long hug, right? I can say to my daughter when she was in high school before she went off to college, and say, honey, I got data that show I need a 22-second hug. And she says, I hate you, get away from me, right? But it's been good for my marriage. I prescribe to you a 22-second hug every 2 hours. You'll never be the same. You're gonna like this. Okay, now here's an interesting one. I have a friend and a colleague, a guy named Paul Zak. He teaches at Claremont Graduate University in Orange County, California. And he's the world's leading expert on blood oxytocin concentrations. He's done all kinds of experiments. Are people more philanthropic when they're getting oxytocin boosts? When they actually see videos about things about which they are sympathetic, they get oxytocin boosts. But he's also looked at what happens when you make eye contact with and touch your dog. It turns out that canines and Homo sapiens evolved in parallel, and both of you get an oxytocin boost. It's a pretty interesting thing. As a matter of fact, this is my dog, Chucho. He's a good boy. When you touch and make eye contact with your dog, your dog gets a 56% boost in blood oxytocin levels, which for your reference, is like staring into the eyes of the person you're most in love with in the world. So when people say, I feel like my dog loves me, your dog literally loves you. By the way, your cat gets a 12% oxytocin boost. So this is the most obvious social science finding ever, which is that your dog loves you and your cat tolerates you. Look, in-person work matters. In-person life matters. Eye contact matters. Touch matters. We are social animals. We are not made for social media because it's actually not social. We need this. We need to be together. We need to insist on being together because as human beings, we need it. And as we're living together as human beings, we need to be more intensely in contact with each other. This, my friends, is one of the great opportunities that we have coming out of the coronavirus epidemic, is learning to truly be together more. We do that, we're going to be better off coming out than we were going in. Second, fear. This is a brain scan. And this is a part of the limbic system of the brain called the amygdala. You've all heard of the amygdala. The amygdala is actually, it manages the most important basic emotion. Now, basic emotions are all processed by the limbic system of the brain. It's also called the lizard brain in the vernacular, obviously. The limbic system is the part of the brain that automatically processes outside stimuli and translates them into emotions that happen to you. There are 4 basic negative emotions. They're disgust, anger, sadness, and fear is the master emotion. Fear is the biggest emotion. It occupies the greatest amount of brain tissue of all of the negative emotions. There are 3 positive emotions too, also processed by the limbic system. They're joy and interest. If you're interested in what I'm talking about right now and you like it, it's because you're getting a basic positive emotion. And that makes sense, doesn't it? That makes evolutionary sense that we would have basic positive emotion that's interest, because you want to be interested in learning things. And so doing, you can become more prosperous, more successful as a human species. And so you would be rewarded for that. And the last, of course, is love. Love is a basic positive emotion. Now, what wins out at any point over all the other emotions? It's the one that's most likely to keep you alive in a pinch. And that's fear. That's why the amygdala is big, and it lights up like a Christmas tree, and it does all kinds of amazing things. So I'll give you an example of how it works. I'll roll through it quickly, but I want you to be amazed by your amygdala. Now, you don't like it all the time, but boy, oh boy, did it keep the species alive. And the reason that your ancestors were able to pass on their genes, and you're here today listening to a speech at Bowdoin College, is because the amygdalas were turned on 10 for your ancestors 500,000 years ago. Let's say that you're walking across the street in a city, and you're minding your business, you're in a crosswalk, and some car runs a red light. It's coming right at you. Well, that vision that you have of the car coming at you at 40 miles an hour, it actually is processed by your visual cortex in the back of your brain, without you knowing it consciously. That specter lights up your amygdala. And your amygdala goes into immediate action, and in 74 milliseconds, it does the following. It sends a signal through the hypothalamus of your brain to the pituitary gland, which then sends a signal down to your adrenal glands sitting right above your kidneys, which immediately pump out stress hormones, most notably adrenaline, or epinephrine, and cortisol. This is in 74 100ths of a second. You have no idea of any of this. You're not conscious of the car. But by the time you realize a car almost ran you over, you've jumped out of the way, your heart is pounding, you're sweating, and you've flipped off the driver. 74 milliseconds. And this is your conscious brain, your prefrontal cortex, the big meaty lobes behind your forehead, that's like 3 seconds behind. Thank God for the amygdala. Your amygdala has kept you alive on many occasions. The problem is, it's hyperactive in modern life. It's maladapted to current circumstances, such as the coronavirus epidemic and a lot of other things that we do. The coronavirus epidemic was characterized in our lives by uncertainty. What's going to happen? I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, am I going to get sick? Are people I love going to get sick? Is the college going to shut down? Is the economy going to melt down? Is my business going to melt down? What's going to happen? I don't know. This uncertainty, which, by the way, is characteristic of modern life in general, but it was exacerbated by this crisis that had unknown outcomes, unknown probabilities, possible catastrophes, and no management was possible because we just didn't know. What did this lead to? Mild chronic fear. Your amygdala is designed for periodic outcomes, for big bursts, for a twig snapping behind you in the forest, and you take off running. That's what your amygdala is good at. What it's bad at is dealing with this chronic fear, this uncertainty, this feeling like maybe something's behind you, but you don't quite know. That's not what the amygdala is adapted for. But that's modern life made worse by a factor of 10 by what we all just went through. That's what we talk about constant stress. If you're under uncertainty, if you're under mild fear, the constant drip of stress hormones will literally destroy your body. And that, by the way, is the recipe for unhappiness. I don't have to tell you that that's the recipe for unhappiness. So what do we do? What do we do when we have all this uncertainty? This is not, once again, the coronavirus epidemic is an opportunity for us to learn about a lot of other things, not just this. So what do we generally do? Well, we have two bad strategies that we like to engage in as human beings. The first is just avoidance. I'm just not going to think about it. Now, that's a bad strategy because one of the things that we know is that when you sublimate your fears, they tend to come out in other places. When you lose control in one area, you'll grab control in another, and it's usually suboptimal. I remember one of my kids, my middle son's name is Carlos. He's a Marine. He's at Camp Pendleton. He's a forward deployed combat Marine. He's 6'5". This guy's a tough, and all I can say is I hope we improve technology for removing tattoos for my son Carlos at some point. He's a tough guy. And, but I remember when he comes home from first grade one day, years ago, and he announces he's gonna not eat anything but peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I'm like, what? That's not our values. And I was like getting up on my high horse about, the morality of peanut butter. It was idiotic what I was doing for sure, but I was really annoyed by the fact that he was getting really picky about his food. So I was complaining about it to my neighbor, my next door neighbor. Now, my next door neighbor, I had 3 kids. My next door neighbor had 10 kids. So, it was like a schoolhouse. And he was an expert in kids. I was like, yeah, Carlos, he's comes home from school. He's not going to eat anything but peanut butter sandwiches. My neighbor, he says, did he get a new teacher in school or something? I said, yeah, how did you know that? He said, it's always the same. They lose control in one area and they take control in some other area. It's the same with all these kids. And he said, and by the way, it's the same with us too. It's kind of true. You lose control of one thing and you try to grab control of something else, and it's usually suboptimal. There's a large literature on, for example, on, speaking of what I was just talking about, eating disorders. And what you find is when people feel like they're losing control in their lives, they're more subject to eating disorders, is what we find, because they want control where they can get it. That's the first bad strategy, is trying to avoid, because you can't avoid. You can't avoid it. It'll come out in some other way. The other thing that we try to do is we try to take the uncertainty and turn it into risk. Now that sounds like I'm being pedantic, or these are synonyms. They're not. You look in the dictionary, you might say that risk equals uncertainty, but they're not the same thing. Uncertainty is where you don't know the outcomes, you can't estimate the probabilities, and so that you can't manage anything. Risk is the opposite. It's what insurance companies actually do, where they can estimate the outcomes and the probabilities, and they can manage them for you by selling you an insurance policy. That's the reason that I might get hit by a bus, but I have peace of mind because the widow Brooks will be well taken care of. And that's a good thing. Believe it or not, the insurance industry is one of the only true happiness businesses for that particular reason, because of the uncertainty to risk. The problem is, in cases like the coronavirus epidemic, there's no way to turn it into risk. But what do we do without thinking about it? We try to do that by getting as much information as possible. The most amazing thing that I saw in March of 2020, in April of 2020, when this thing was breaking out, was that Johns Hopkins University was putting a coronavirus dashboard up on the internet. And people would spend 6 or 7 hours a day, click, 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 because they wanted to see what was going on. Like they could finally find some new information. Or watching CNN for hours and hours a day. It's like, I heard Fauci's coming on. He's going to give us some new information. He's not going to give you any new information. He doesn't know. He doesn't know. It's unknowable. But we feel that if we watch more, we binge more, we can finally turn that uncertainty into risk, and all it does is it makes us kind of insane. So what do we do instead? And what do we learn from this that we can superimpose on the rest of our lives? What is the growth opportunity by dealing with this properly? It's this. One of the most important things, one of the most important skills that you can adopt is called metacognition. I introduced you to the wonderful world of the limbic system. One of the most important Buddhist teachings about the emotional regulation and the way that you can regulate your impulses and your urges is by observing yourself as if you were an outsider from some remove. In other words, just as you meditate, if you're a meditator, think about the feelings that you're having. Understand them. Now, what are you doing? You're making them metacognitive, which is another way of saying you're moving them from the limbic system of your brain to the prefrontal cortex of your brain. This is good neuroscience that the Buddhists have always suggested. By the way, your grandmother gave you the same advice when she said, when you're angry, count to 10. Why? Because it gives you a chance to not be reactive, to not be limbic in your reactions. On the contrary, it gives you an opportunity to move those sensations, to move those cognitions into your prefrontal cortex where they're not managing you, you can manage them. This is the secret to emotional regulation. And this is the beginning of how we deal with uncertainty. Metacognition of uncertainty is to say, I am experiencing fear because of uncertainty. I am experiencing discomfort because of uncertainty. You have just taken control of the problem. Step 2 is analysis. Look, I can't avoid this. I can't convert it into risk. I can't solve the problem by binging on information. That's an analytic conclusion. You're in charge. You're the CEO. And finally, and the most important part, is the actual management part of the process. I had a friend who was an oncologist who specialized in late-stage diagnoses of cancer. That's a hard job. And I said, so what do you tell your patients? I mean, he's the guy who says, I just got your test results and you need to come into my office. And there's nothing good that comes after that. And I said, so what do you tell them? And I said, I tell them not to go Google their disease. I said, why? I mean, don't they want to know? He says, what they're going to do is they're going to go Google whatever it happens to be, whatever it is, and if it's exotic or not, and they're going to look for prognosis on the page because they're going to try to turn their uncertainty into risk, and they're just going to make themselves less happy because they can't do that. They can't actually manage it in that way. So he says, I tell them to do this. I say, tomorrow morning you're going to wake up, and you're going to say, oh yeah, that. Now say, I don't know what's going to happen this week. I don't know what's going to happen this month. I really don't know what's going to happen this time next year. But I do know that I just woke up. I do know that I'm still alive, and I'm pretty well, and I will not waste the gift that is this day. That's what we all can do every day. That's the gift that we give to ourselves every day. I will not waste the gift of this day. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if the next variant is coming around. I don't know if I come back next year to Bowdoin College, you're still going to be in masks. I hope not. But I'm not going to waste the gift that is my opportunity to talk to you about happiness and love today. And none of us should waste the gift that is this day. Finally, unwelcome change. We as a species hate change, which is really weird when you think about it, because change is all around us. Change is absolutely constant, and we hate the one thing that we absolutely, under any circumstances, cannot avoid. Why would evolution lead us to hate the one thing that's going to happen? It's almost as if there's a conspiracy, like Mother Nature wants us to be unhappy. Well, the truth is, I don't think Mother Nature wants us to be unhappy, but I do believe that Mother Nature doesn't care if we are happy. Mother Nature wants us to survive and pass on our genes. Happiness, that's your problem. We need to manage ourselves in a way that we actually have a shot at happiness. That's the reason that we hate the inevitable, because it actually helps us to survive. There are two phenomena, maybe many of you have heard about these things, but if you haven't, I'll fill you in very quickly. What are the two biases that govern our attitude about change now and change in the past? The first is what we call the negativity bias toward change. In other words, you see things changing, you assume the worst. You only see the bad things in change at first. This is a natural human tendency. Once again, the twig snaps behind you, you assume it's a predator, and you run. If you just assume the best, you're going to be somebody's lunch. It's a lot more profitable for you to assume the worst than to assume the best. It's more fun to assume the best, but sooner or later, you're going to get in trouble. And so evolution has favored the paranoid. Basically, that's negativity bias. This always dominates. This dominates for everybody except for a small class of people that are called neophiles. And that's just a made-up word that means people who love new things. These are the people who are like, you know, you offer them something to eat, and they're like, I'll eat it. You know, I'll eat that. There are people, yeah, I'll do that, whatever it happens to be. And it's like, I mean, you shouldn't, that's dangerous. No, I'll do that. And there are people like that, to be sure. They, generally speaking, don't survive very long because they need a little bit more negativity bias. Like, what is on that spoon? Is that food? I shouldn't put it in my mouth, like what most of us would do. Okay, but here's the good news when there's change. If you get through it and you survive it and you learn from it, you love it. So some of you remember your freshman year in college. Some of you who are students, you come to Bowdoin College, and your freshman year, I mean, look, I'm a university professor. You can't fool me. It wasn't that great. You know, when I talk to freshmen and they're having their first years, and in their first semester, if they're having a really good time, it means they're failing classes and drinking a lot. That's almost always what it means. If you're not failing classes and drinking a lot, you're probably lonely and you're having a hard time till about November. That's the pattern, right? Okay, but now you remember it is a really good time because you started to understand yourself. You started to learn about yourself. You started to meet other people for the first time. You started to open up your aperture socially and emotionally in the way that you never had before because you'd never been away from home before. And you look back on it with a kind of sentimentality. This is a very common thing. Why would we look back on a time when we were suffering, because of uncertainty bias, among other things, and look back on it, but actually with affection? The reason is because all the bad stuff is evaporated, but all the learning remains. Later on, you get all the benefits. That, my friends, is called fading affect bias. And you always get it unless you resist the change. Unless in the time of change, you're leaning against it. You're fighting against it. You won't let these changes happen. You say, no, under my watch, this will not happen in my life. Now, the change is going to happen whether you like it or not. The only choice that you have is whether you're going to learn from it or not. So since you don't like it, which is normal, you might as well accept it so that you can get fading affect bias later. So what do we do about this in the case of what we've just gone through? Well, to begin with, here's a point I want to make, which is that it's so weird that we look at something like the coronavirus epidemic and we're surprised. What are we surprised about? Every 10 years, there's a thing like this that happens. It's not the same thing every time. Okay, but right now, it's the 2020's coronavirus epidemic. A decade or so ago, we thought the ATM machines were going to stop working. We didn't know if this was the end of our economic system as we knew it, and we were all going to be, going to the supermarket, and there was going to be no food on the shelf. There were times of, maybe some of you don't remember how bad it was, but I do. It was bad. It was scary. 10 years before that was 9/11, or more or less, decade more or less, give or take. 10 years before that, the end of the Cold War, which is a great triumph for some, but a world geopolitical event that changed everything for people all over the world. Every 10 years. And every 10 years we're like, that can never happen. What's the problem? The problem is that we're always thinking about change, these big changes, very specifically. We're never thinking about them as change per se. That changes our lives. 10 years from now, you know what's going to happen? We're going to be ready for a financial crisis and a pandemic. And something else is going to hit us. That's the thing. It's like, I can't believe that happened. How could that happen? Because it always happens, and you never predict it. So we shouldn't be so surprised about this, but the nature of mankind, of human life, is that we're surprised. So what can we learn? How can we do this better? When I have conversations with people about the coronavirus epidemic, they always talk about pre-pandemic life and pandemic life. These two, time periods. It's sort of a dualistic view of the two eras, before and now. And they talk about things they like and things they don't like. And they're always focusing on these two quadrants. They talk about the stuff they used to love. Getting together with people, traveling freely, not wearing a mask, seeing your family. I love that. I don't get to do that. I love that. Then they talk about the pandemic, and they talk about the stuff they dislike. All the stuff I missed. My older son missed his college graduation. A lot of people were told by the public health authorities they couldn't go to funerals of family members. A lot of disappointment, a lot of fear, a lot of loneliness, a lot of the stuff we're talking about here. But that's the wrong way of thinking about it. You want fading affect bias from the coronavirus epidemic? Do you want to get better at fading affect bias for any change in your life? You need to be working in the other quadrants. These are the actionable quadrants. This is your strategy. Start thinking about the stuff you didn't like before the coronavirus epidemic and you're not going to go back to. Now, when I talk to people about this deeply, I'll say, what do you not miss? Think about it. Let's just start by the commuting, traffic, for example. But then when I start digging deeply, the things that people really don't miss is toxic relationships. Not just at work, just kind of every place that you put up with. It's kind of the hassles of life, right? The people that gossip and you don't like yourself when you're with them. The people that put you down and make you feel bad. The negative people that go out just to be negative. That's something that we got to put on pause during coronavirus, isn't it? And it was kind of a relief. You need a plan to not go back. Now, I'm not saying you need a plan to not go back to work. The Great Resignation, so-called, which is a lot of people quitting their jobs, that's mostly because a lot of employers are not asking people to go back, and jobs without people are just jobs. It's just a job. And when it's just a job, you might as well get another job that pays a little bit better. That's one of the reasons for the Great Resignation. That's not really what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about your strategic plan to not re-engage in parts of life that are not good for you. Second, what do you actually love that you actually got during the pandemic? Now, net, you'd prefer not to have had it. I get it. But there's something good. In every single one of your lives, there's something good. Maybe you traveled less for work. I did. I got much closer to my daughter. When she was stuck in her room and the sorry excuse for high school, that was just a Zoom screen. But I ate lunch with her every day, and it was great. And now I talk to her all the time, It's not as good, not so much Oxytocin, because it's on, WhatsApp. But me and my little girl, we're never going to be the same. That we just have more love, more understand. She's the only one who really understands me sometimes, I think. And I wouldn't have known that if it had not been for the coronavirus epidemic. The more intimate relationships at home, the things that you want to keep, make a list of these two quadrants and figure out how to keep them, and the fading affect bias will be yours in abundance, and then do it again for the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. And every time something is really bad that you don't like, the circumstances that you don't like, you'll say, that's my opportunity for those two quadrants. Here's the deal. This is actually a sketch that was done by my mother many years ago. My mother was a watercolorist and multimedia artist in the Pacific Northwest of some sort of local renown. And she would do all these little sketches to figure out what she wanted to do. Nothing important, just informally. And she took this little snapshot of me and then just sketched it out. I was 11. And clearly I was fishing. I was fishing off the rocks in a place called Lincoln City, Oregon. I grew up in Seattle in the Pacific Northwest. And I would go down to Lincoln City, Oregon, where my aunt had a trailer where she lived because she was a receptionist at a local hotel. And it was bliss for me. It was the greatest. And I remember one year, I was kind of an avid fisherman, but I'd never fished off the rocks in the rocky, craggy, rugged Oregon coast. And so I got all the gear and I studied it. I got a book, studied it, got all my tackle. And I went out and I was fishing off the rocks, and my mom took that picture. And it looks really fun, but I was actually miserable when she took that picture. The reason is because I wasn't catching anything. But something happened, and it's funny, I just found this by serendipity after my mother passed away many years ago. Right after this, an old guy from the village, from the town, walks up to me, a wizened mariner, a lifer, with his own fishing pole. He says, "Hey kid, you catching anything?" I said, "No." He said, "You getting any bites?" I said, "No." He says, "'Cause you're doing it wrong." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You can't catch fish right now. You have to wait for the falling tide." I said, "What's that?" Maybe you know this. We're on the ocean. The falling tide is when the tide is going out especially fast. There's like a half-hour period when the tide is just screaming out. And I said, that doesn't make sense because all the fish are gone, right? I mean, the fish are gone. He says, "No. During the falling tide, the water's moving so fast that it stirs up the plankton and the bait fish, and the game fish go crazy. He says it starts in like 45 minutes. Okay. So I wait around, he's with me, 45 minutes ago, he says, now. We throw in our lines, and we're pulling fish out one after the other. Like 20 fish in half an hour. It's fun, it's thrilling, it's exhausting. And at the end, we're sort of sitting on the rocks, with fish in a cooler, and he's, feeling kind of philosophical at this point. This old guy, I never met him, and he lights up a cigarette. He says, kid, during a falling tide, you can only make one mistake. And I said, what? He said, not having your line in the water. And I always remembered that. This was a falling tide. It was a falling tide, like everything was going away. You were losing things. You didn't know. And it was going out fast. And it looked like you were losing everything, and you might as well just pack it up and hope for the best. But that's the time to get your line in the water. See, what's true in that fishing story is really true in life. These liminal states between the status quo and the next status quo, when you feel like you're losing everything, this is a period of particular creativity and ferment. You have more opportunities than you think, whether it's with your loneliness, whether it's with your fear, whether it's your uncertainty or your hatred of change. These are the moments when you can be your best self, when your true opportunities can come to life. You didn't choose COVID. It chose you. The only choice that we have is how we're going to react to it. We're going to learn and grow or not. It's up to us. We have an opportunity to become stronger as a society. We have an opportunity to become stronger as a nation, to love each other more, to understand each other across differences in ways that we never have before, to benefit from differences in the way that we see the world and the people that we love and the different things that people want to do. Or we can miss the opportunity and become more polarized. We can miss the opportunity and have less love. We can miss the opportunity to have the unhappiness metastasize into a more atomized society that has less happiness. It's our choice. We can, if we want, we can look back on this together as a really sacred time of growth. We can look back on it and say, I didn't want it, but I learned from it. And my life got better, and my society got better. It's in our hands. This is the way that all of us can actually find the post-traumatic growth that can come to any of us, and in point of fact can come to all of us, if we just want to look for it. If you want more, the books, and I write an article every Thursday morning in The Atlantic called How to Build a Life on the Science of Happiness, which gets at a lot of these particular ideas. You could even take a class in this from edX, which is on the science of happiness that is just coming on March 31st. All over the world, a massive open online course. It's free. If you want to learn more about it, there's lots and lots of resources, and I'll leave that up, and if you want to contact me, I would be delighted to talk to you. Delighted to talk to you about ways that we can all work together, because the world's in our hands, and the happiness of our brothers and sisters is really in our hands as well. Please join me in making this world better, and thank you, and God bless you, and thank you for coming tonight. Thank you. Thank you. All right, we have time for a little bit of Q&A. I understand it's 8 o'clock, and so it's not quite your bedtime yet. I'm delighted to hear what's on your mind. We've got mics on either side, and you can line up or you can just shout it out. Probably better if we go to the mics because we have people who are online, so I would love to hear it. If you want, you can just tell me, and then I'll make sure and repeat your question, okay? Yeah.
Kids, young kids. Any particular thoughts for, dealing with young children who have been particularly struggling, as a result, how to communicate or talk with them?
So kids who have been struggling with this a lot, or ordinarily is because of the isolation that they have endured. And that's one of the things that we can address quite clearly and carefully by trying to minimize the isolation that's actually happening around them. So looking for ways that people don't actually have to be isolated. Now, part of the good thing, one of the blessings of the coronavirus epidemic is that kids are at relatively little risk for this compared to older people. And what we're finding increasingly is that it's very safe for kids to be getting back together, and looking for ways that we can find more advantageous and more frequent social contact with children, I think is one of the greatest responsibilities that we can do, whether it's at school or in our social lives, is actually making sure that that's the case. We have to go to extra care and extra effort to expose our kids to other kids and to other people, quite frankly. And then, here's an interesting thing, is that kids can understand a lot of this. And when you talk about this with a lot of kids, you could say, what did you learn over the past year? What did you actually learn? And this is an opportunity for them to learn some of these techniques of metacognition that are just kind of occurring to us as people as well. You can find that a lot of kids, when they experience traumas like this, they can experience a lot of growth too, but they need a guide. Most adults will experience post-traumatic growth pretty spontaneously. A lot of kids won't, and they'll suffer for a really long time because they don't have somebody to take their hand. So help them in their post-traumatic growth as well by talking about exactly this. And this is your opportunity, by the way, to be a happiness professor as well. Thank you for that. Thank you for that beautiful question. Yeah. Who's next? I guess we don't have any questions. Really? Really? Anyway, that's great. Yeah, yes, sir.
That may be unwelcome, or something that maybe like COVID you might be experiencing on your own, and sort of how you manage moving through.
Yeah, no, thanks. And so uncertainty or fear on your own is your actual opportunity to connect more with other people. And this is one of the things when we're going through this collective trauma. And there's a very interesting book by a guy named Bruce Feiler that's called Life is in the Transitions. And what he finds is, he looks at the transitions that people have in life, the changes that people have in life, most of which are unwelcome precisely because they're involuntary. And what he finds in his data is that you will go through an involuntary transition in your life on average every 18 months. And you will have what he calls, it's a best-selling book, so he has to make up words, which is what we do. He has something called a life quake. And that's something that's a big deal. That's a death in the family. That's a divorce. That's something that is a real game changer for you. And it's almost always unwelcome precisely because it's involuntary. When it's collective, we're all going through this together. In a weird way, it's easier. But your question is really interesting because what happens when it's not collective? What happens when you're going through this by yourself? And the answer is you're going to try to make the wrong decision. There's a very interesting body of literature that shows that when you're dealing with a trauma by yourself, or even if you're dealing with very negative emotions like loneliness, your tendency is to do the opposite of what you should do because your executive function tends to be impaired by the negative emotions. So if I give you an example, you're lonely. It's not the coronavirus epidemic. You're just a lonely person because you're isolated and things aren't going right. Some of you have experienced this. Me too. So what do you want to do? It's like, cocoon. I don't know. It's by myself, feel bad. Probably, lie on the couch by myself and get out some ice cream and watch some Netflix. That's the wrong thing to do. What do you need? You need to call a friend. You need to go out. You need to get some sunshine, a little bit of vitamin D. You need to ride your bike. You need to get together with other people. But you don't do that because your executive function is impaired. So here's what I teach my students under those circumstances. When you're feeling uncertainty, you're feeling fear, you're feeling a negative emotion under those circumstances, you need to follow what's called the opposite signal strategy. Automatically, when you are suffering something by yourself, don't do what you automatically would do because that self-care is usually inappropriate. It took me a long time to figure that one out. Actually, it took a lot of research on that because that's a robust and well-researched finding. But the opposite signal strategy, now there's sometimes when you should follow exactly your instincts. Like, if a tiger is chasing you, you really should run. I mean, you shouldn't say, the opposite signal strategy is I'm gonna see if I can, get it to eat out of my hand. Don't do that, right? But when you're talking about the self-care with respect to these really, really deeply negative emotions about fear and uncertainty and loneliness, the opposite signal strategy is indicated and appropriate. And by the way, you can get really, really good at it. And then encourage other people to engage in it as well. Look for somebody who's got these particular issues and try to force them out of their shell. There's a very interesting paper that shows this, that when you actually will surprise somebody who's lonely or scared, you surprise them with an idea to do something that they wouldn't want to do because they're cocooning, they usually will say yes, and they'll always be glad they did. So impose the opposite signal strategy, never planned, always as a surprise on the people that you love. And that should be anybody that you can find. Thanks for that. That's great. Yeah.
I suppose my follow-up question would be, I know there's a Seinfeld episode where George Costanza starts following his every
I love the Seinfeld. You're too young for Seinfeld. You know, it's interesting. That was speaking of that. I was giving a talk on this on a similar subject. I was talking about how we in a world that has less love, how we can get more love. And it was at the Aspen Ideas Festival. I was giving the talk, and it was big, like out of 600 or 700 people. And I was looking out of the crowd, and I was talking because I usually don't use notes. And I'm looking at people, and I'm looking, and I was saying, that looks a lot like Jerry Seinfeld. In the back of the crowd. Couldn't be. It was Jerry Seinfeld. And I was so nervous about making any jokes. I was so unbelievably nervous that I would make a joke and it would fall flat. And later, I was talking to him afterwards and I said, you made me so nervous. And he actually gave me joke advice. It was the best thing ever, I have to say. It was like the highlight of my speech-making experience under the circumstances. So anyway, I don't know why I thought of that, except that I met that guy once and he helped me. What is the advice he gave me? Use fewer words. So I'll give you the exact example. I was making a point about how my generation has made life more difficult for people your generation by keeping you too safe. And the point was that, when I was doing a paper route when I was 11 years old at 4:30 in the morning by myself in a lower sort of working class neighborhood in Seattle that Ted Bundy had actually been in 4 years before snatching people, right? And I wanted to keep the paper route, but my mother was worried because my mother was, a normal mother. And my dad, he wanted me to keep the route because he liked me having money. And my dad was a biostatistician. He was a PhD in biostat. So he made this empirical argument to my mother. And he said, actually, I've been looking at the data, and Arthur doesn't fit the core demographic profile of a serial killer, right? And I thought it was pretty funny, but they laughed kind of like you just laughed, which is sort of polite. And so I said, why didn't anybody laugh at that? He says, don't say Ted Bundy, because everybody sees Ted Bundy and it's awful. Just say serial killer. I'm like, okay. Next night I just said serial killer, and they thought it was like the funniest thing ever. The guy's a genius. It's unbelievable. So yeah, so there you are. More data than you wanted on that. Yeah. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yes, sir. So my guidance on social media use is the same for every generation because we all have the same brains and we all have the same hearts. And the answer is no, don't get rid of it. Social media should only ever be a complement to your in-person relationships, never a substitute. That's the guide. Okay, the minute it's a substitute, you're taking a cybernetic zero oxytocin substitute for actual oxytocin sources. And that's a huge problem. So the way to think about it is make sure that you total all of your social medias up across all platforms and make sure that it does not exceed an hour a day. And then ask yourself, is this enhancing my in-person relationships or is it substituting for my in-person relationships? Those are the two questions to ask. How much and how am I using it? Now, the first social media platform that figures out how to do this, how to make it truly enhancing to human relationships, is going to prosper and salt the earth over the other companies. But they don't know how to do this. And part of the reason is because we've kind of turned the keys over to our complex adaptive life. Mathematicians talk about the difference between complex and complicated problems. Complicated problems are highly mathematical. They're hard to solve. But once you do, you can solve it over and over and over again with effortless ease, like making a jet engine, very complicated problem. Life, the interesting things in life are complex problems. They're easy to figure out, but they're impossible to solve. So a football game is a complex problem. Easy to understand. One team gets more points than the other and wins. You can't simulate it on a computer because it's too many permutations. It's too complex to do that. But that's what makes it beautiful. Love is complex. Your cat is complex. You know that it wants to be scratched and get food and go out, but you never know what it's going to do. That's the complexity in life is the beauty in life. The problem is social media takes the complex adaptive problem of love and tries to solve it with a complicated solution. It's like, I want a cat that's warm and alive, and it keeps giving me a toaster. The toaster doesn't do it. It's like, I like toasters. Toasters are great, but it's not a cat. And that's the problem. And so if you're trying to get the cat problem solved with the toaster, you'll just get more and more isolated, more and more lonely, more and more frustrated, and you must take care of yourself by making sure that the toaster actually makes it easier for you to have more human contact, or more cat contact, as it were. I'm attenuating the metaphor, so I apologize for that. And making sure you just have a basic limit of not going past 30 or 60 minutes a day, depending on your threshold. That's what I recommend. Yeah. Yeah, yes, sir.
If you could ask corporations to change something about their culture or operations to address the Great Resignation and help people from sanitation workers all the way up to executives prioritize their joy with their job over their pay, what would that be?
So that's a great question, thank you. The data show unambiguously that about half of your pay is your friends. About half of your pay in a job is your friends. Now, one of the reasons that you can make a bunch of money when you graduate from Bowdoin College by going someplace where you don't like things is you have to overpay if you have a terrible culture. The best way, the best cost-saving measure you can engage in is having a culture where people love and support each other. The reason for the Great Resignation is because the coronavirus epidemic and the resulting productivity enhancements that came from the technological improvements that we've seen have gotten rid of effectively half of people's pay. And then the people are wondering, it's like, yeah, the people are so productive, it's fantastic. And a body at home wants to stay at home. So people are saying, yeah, I'm lonely, but I don't want to go back there because of the commute and what a hassle, and actually I moved out to the suburbs and it'd be way worse, so I think I want to keep staying at home. But once again, you need an opposite signal strategy, right? People who are at home and lonely need an opposite signal strategy, and they need to go back to work. But the employers are saying, but they're really productive, and they say they don't want to go back to work. And so we're in a prisoner's dilemma at this point, and people are getting less happy. So if you're a leader, you need to do what people actually need and want, which is to create a culture in which people get together and they're in person, loving each other as friends. 70% of people who go to work in person have a best friend at work, and 60% of them say they wouldn't leave for a higher paying job because it would mean leaving their friends. That's all you need to know. This is the life in life, is actually human contact. And that's it. It's more love, more contact, more friendship, and thinking about people not as homo economicus, not as machines, but actually as human beings, regardless of the economic circumstances that we're talking about, because the economic circumstances are, at best, half of the equation. Thank you, that's a great question. Thank you for that. Yes, sir. And then I'll come back over here. I didn't miss you. Yeah.
From what you talked about, I assume you have a meditation practice.
Yeah.
I'd like curious to listen, hear more about your practice and the insight you got from it, especially with regard to ego and self.
Yeah. So people ask a lot, what are the habits of the happiest people? And they're basically four. If you boil the ocean of all of the research, there's 10,000 research articles on it. And what you find is that half of your happiness is genetic, and another quarter of it is circumstantial but doesn't last. But about a quarter of your happiness really comes down to your habits, and those habits come in four categories. You can think of this as your investment portfolio of happiness, and they really are your faith, your family, your friendship, and work that's meaningful insofar as that you're earning your success and that you're serving other people. That's it. And I don't care if you're a professor at Bowdoin College or a bus driver or whatever. If you have those two things, then work will bring you joy. And if you don't, work will bring you bitterness. If you don't feel like you're earning your success and you're being rewarded for your hard work, for example, and merit, and your skills meet your passions, and most importantly, you're serving other people. The first one's faith. Now, when I say faith, once again, I talked about this briefly before, I don't mean my traditional Catholic faith. That's actually not it according to the data. Now, mine's great. I recommend it. I like it. But there's lots and lots of ways that you can actually get the happiness benefits. It requires that you zoom out, and that you zoom out from the boring sitcom that you keep watching over and over and over again. Now, when you ask about how people can start to walk that particular path, a lot of you probably have that question. People who are most likely to have that question, by the way, are over 40. So people over 40, they have religious stirrings for the first time in a long time, and they don't know what to do. So what do? I have, for the past 10 years, I've had a very close working relationship and a teaching relationship with my teacher, who's His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And so I've worked with him a bunch of times. We've written together. I've gone to his monastery in Dharamsala many times, and we've done a bunch of different programs together. I love him. He's truly an inflecting person in my life. People say, don't meet your heroes. He's better. He's better than you could possibly imagine. He's that good. He's just a wonderful, wise, warm human being. And he says this, he gives this advice for people who are trying to walk the spiritual path for the first time. You need to start with an examination of what you believe. And what that means is doing the work. What are my values? What do I actually believe? Don't give me your politics, that's boring. What do you believe is right and wrong in the world? And then ask, am I living in accord with those values? Think about it for 10 minutes a day and make the lists. Second, you need a contemplative practice. And there are many contemplative practices, from getting it on a Headspace app to having a life of prayer to walking in nature. 10 to 15 minutes a day. And finally, you need to read a lot. You need to read the wisdom literature, the religious literature, the spiritual literature, the philosophy, actually, that can elevate you, and everything from Sartre's Being and Nothingness to the holy scriptures of your particular tradition. Read the wisdom. Those are the three things. It's your moral life, it is your contemplative life, and it is your intellectual life. Those are the three things you need to engage in, and you will be on the spiritual path. Okay, that second one, that contemplative practice, takes so many different forms. I pray the Catholic Rosary every day. Where did I learn to do it? Well, I know the prayers. I mean, I've memorized the prayers, for decades. I've known the prayers of the Catholic Rosary, but I didn't really learn how to do it until I went to study and sit in meditation with the Dalai Lama's Tibetan Buddhist monks in Dharamsala, where I took intensive meditation sessions with his monks. And I sat in meditation with them. I learned my posture. I learned my attitude. I learned about the right desire while I'm praying my rosary. I'm not chanting the suttas. I'm not chanting in Tibetan. I'm not a Buddhist. I'm a Catholic. But I learned that from the Buddhists. Mother Teresa, St. Teresa of Calcutta, one time said, I love all religions, but I'm in love with the Catholic faith. And that's how I feel as well. And that means I can get all kinds of technique and wisdom from other particular traditions, and that's what I've learned. I'm a Catholic Buddhist, I guess. But certainly when I'm sitting in meditation, that's the case. Every day. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, yeah, right over here. Yeah.
So you mentioned the pattern of an event happening every 10 years.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, you gave these three things that we can learn from COVID, but I'm wondering if there's anything specifically that you think we can do to prepare for whatever could be next, or if it's inevitable, we just have to learn from that.
Yeah. So the key to preparing for change, it's a great question. The key to preparing for change is deciding that you want change, that you welcome change. See, here's the key. The uncertainty bias, if you're living according to your biases, again, Mother Nature is perfectly happy for you to be miserable, right? But up to you, you can actually say, look, I am going to be uncomfortable with change, but every time I see it, I'm going to take that as my signal that something's afoot. What's your name? Louisa. I'm going to say, Louisa's got some action in store. Something's coming. Something bad happened to Louisa, that means something is going to happen in Louisa's life that's going to be super interesting, right? Just get into the mentality of seeing that. Now, the 10-year change is the big change. The tide comes in, the tsunami that actually comes in. But then you'll be a leader in this, because you're going to be the one that's like, trust me, guys, trust me, this is going to be incredible. I know I'm not going to like it, and people are going to think you're crazy, but you're going to be right every single time. Because you're going to be dedicated to do the things that I talked about here, but you're going to be prepared for it, but you're going to be mentalized for it. It's so interesting, You'll also live in a different way. I figured out years ago that when I was studying entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship is pretty interesting from a business perspective, seed round, startup, angel investors, blah, 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 blah. The really interesting thing about entrepreneurship is the startup of your life. And you're the startup entrepreneur of your life. That means taking big risks with your heart. That's super scary and super fun and super exciting. It's like, I want in, right? I want explosive rewards. That's what I want. I want faith in a future that's uncertain. I want that a lot. And when you do that, then you'll be looking for these 10-year things. You'll take your career down to the studs every 10 years with confidence and love and joy, discomfort. It won't be fun all the time, but it'll be an amazing adventure if you actually get into this particular mentality. Louisa, the life entrepreneur, and that's what you can do. Imagine what you could do every 10 years over the course of your life. Then you're not chasing the dumb stuff, like money, power, pleasure, fame. So stupid, so boring. but chase the things that really matter, which is the life in life, the love in life, the adventure, the differences, the relationships, the things that you can actually do. And you do that by basically going against your instincts when it comes to change. Thank you for that. Thanks. Yes, ma'am, and we'll come back here. I was going to say, to the guy in the Bowdoin shirt, which is everybody. Okay, so that's right, yeah.
So speaking of the 10 years,
Uh-huh.
and I just recently heard you on Afford Anything, and you talked about leaving the think tank job.
Mhm.
I believe that was after 10 years.
Yeah, it's 10 years.
And,
Every 10 years, Lisa. I do it every 10 years, yeah. That's, my wife is getting tired of it, yeah.
and I think you went hiking in Spain
Yeah.
with your wife. How did you know to make that change? Did you feel like you should have made it earlier?
Yeah.
How do you know?
Yeah. So that's the new book that I had that just came out last week. It talks an awful lot about how you know when you're going from one thing to another, and how all of us need to go from one thing to another more and have more confidence in change in our life, and how we can navigate those particular changes. It's especially hard when you're my age. It's especially hard to make these changes because you become, in a way, more brittle unless you're more dedicated to it. So I talk about the neurological changes that we experience, et cetera. So there's a lot of brain science, a lot of social science in it, for sure. But the key thing to keep in mind is that you dedicate yourself to doing something for a period of time. And then, with confidence, you see the change as the adventure per se. So when I went into, I was an executive, I was a French horn player for 12 years. And then I went to graduate school, and I became a college professor for 10 years. And then I became a chief executive for 10 years, 10 and a half, 10.6, 10 years and 6 months to the day. And now I'm doing this, which is I'm creating a happiness movement. And I'm going to do it for probably 10 years. Now, I'm going to guess that. And part of that is because it has a certain cadence to it. And I've actually studied that leaders, for example, when I was leading the think tank, that leaders have a tendency after about 10 years to hit their pull date. And one of the things that you find about leadership is that you can leave before you're ready, or you can leave on somebody else's terms. And I know which one of those I want. I mean, leaving on somebody else's terms, that's super not fun. So I decided to leave before I was ready, but it also required a process of discernment. Every spiritual and religious tradition, every philosophical tradition has discernment. Discernment is not what should I do. Discernment is what should I want. And that's the most obscure thing. Most people don't know the answer to the question, what do I want? You know, I don't know what I want, and so I'm looking for the world to tell me what I want. I'm watching television. I'm looking at television. I guess I want a Buick. No, I don't. I guess I want a boat. I guess I want a house on Cape Cod. I don't want any of that nonsense, right? The world is feeding me messages about what I want. Discernment is figuring out what your heart actually desires. Now, in the Ignatian spiritual tradition, me as a Catholic, that's about prayer, about the nature of right desire. The Buddhists talk about that as a word called panna in Sanskrit, which means finding the path of right desire. The ancient Greeks talked about sunesis, which is to figure out what one is supposed to do. But it's all discernment in this case, and you have to do the work. You basically have to do the work. So when I was 8.5 years out, I started doing the work. Every day, for 15 minutes, for me as a Catholic, I would spend 15 minutes before the Blessed Sacrament. I would say, show me the way. Just show me my path. Just please show me my path. And my Buddhist friends do it in a different way. And you can do it philosophically and secularly in the same way, but you get the same information because what will be revealed to you is the nature of your own desire, but not if you don't do the work. The world will give you a counterfeit set of facts about your own heart. And it will quite frankly send you almost inevitably in the wrong direction, toward money, power, pleasure, fame, as opposed to toward faith and family and friendship and service to other people. So that's what the discernment actually gets you. So what did I do, by the way? And that, you talked about one thing that I've written about extensively, which is that the liminality, the time between changes. What I like to do is I like to do a pilgrimage. There's a pilgrimage called El Camino de Santiago, which is across northern Spain. It was made famous by Martin Sheen in this movie, The Way. But it's been around for 1,100 years, where pilgrims, religious and non-religious, they'll actually start and walk hundreds of miles across northern Spain toward the cathedral at Santiago de Compostela, which is a city in northern Spain. And it's extraordinary because it slows your life down utterly. And you have no choice but to think about right desire. Step after step, 25 kilometers a day. step after step. It's so boring. There's nothing to do except to think, except to feel your life, except to listen to your heart. It's a beautiful thing, actually. And so that's what I did. That's what I've done the last couple of times when this has been opportune in my life, and I recommend it to all of you. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Clayton. My excuse is that I have light in my eyes. What did I say? Yeah, yes, sir, that's right.
So I had a very good friend who dated this tremendously unreliable, ever-changing person. And
It wasn't me. Yeah.
and they would go from, I'm going to live with you for 2 months, I'm going to not talk to you for 6. And boy, was there a change, right?
Yeah.
And once I asked, why do you do this? Well, they keep me on my toes. Is there a space where instead of leaning into change, we should instead look for reliability and comfort? And not only in personal relationships, but also in our everyday lives. Like, yes, you speak about this leading into change, but should we also look for more reliable spaces, more comfortable spaces?
It's a very profound question. It's easy for me to say yes. I don't know the answer to that, but I do believe that we require in our lives stability and change simultaneously. And where do I choose stability? My marriage is 30 years, and my wife is the person on whom I will look in the eye as I take my last breath. My love is enduring and everlasting for my wife. It just is. My faith is going to last me for the rest of my life. And everything else is up for grabs. Everything else is like a stochastic process, man. Like, I'm going to go here, I'm going to go there. Why? Because I have that stability. Because I actually have that platform. Because I have that foundation. What's the foundation of stability? Love is what it is. It's love. And this is the interesting thing. People say, what's the secret? There's a guy there's a study at Harvard called the Harvard Study of Adult Development. It's an 84-year longitudinal study that started with Harvard men, but then it expanded to people who didn't go to college, and then spouses and partners and children, and so it's demographically diverse. 84 years. And it looks at what people did early in life and how they lived their lives, and it showed how they turned out with respect to their happiness and health. I was just lecturing on it today in my class at Harvard. And the director of it, a guy named George Valiant for a long time, was asked, okay, can you describe the whole study in 5 words? And he said, sure. Happiness is love, full stop. And it really is. You remember I told you the 4 habits of the happiest people? Faith, family, friendship, and work that serves others. In other words, love, 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 and more love. The stability actually has to come in the love in your life. And on top of that, everything else is a detail. Everything else is lifestyle. Everything else is adventure. But that's actually the most interesting thing that you find is that the best entrepreneurs are the ones who have stability at home. Why? Because they have actually something that they can count on. So my best answer, and I don't know if it's the right answer, I don't know if it's the most sophisticated philosophical answer, but my best answer is your friend doesn't have the right relationship that will give the basis in love, in stability of love, to make the real kind of cosmic and transcendental instability most interesting and most fruitful. Yeah. All right. Yes, sir.
I was curious to know, contrasting your use of happiness versus joy.
Yeah.
Because, happiness does have the root of it comes from to hap, has some chance to it.
Yeah, no, first it comes from Middle English, which is the word hop, which means Glück in German, which is another Germanic language, obviously, which means luck. Yes, go on.
So I was just curious, how would you contrast to
Yeah.
joy and happiness?
Yeah, so happiness is a word that everybody thinks they know until they think about it, at which point it becomes highly amorphous, which is why we define it in the field in a bunch of different ways. My preferred definition is the macronutrient balance of enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose. Joy is actually a lot less precisely defined because it depends on who you are. If in religious communities, joy is sort of the beatific vision, and joy for psychologists is the euphoria that comes at very narrow moments. So joy can be something that you feel because something really good happened to you, which would be an intense moment of satisfaction. So joy for psychologists would be the feeling that you get for a job well done, for a goal that's actually met, that feeling of elation. That's the joy that psychologists talked about. Whereas the ancient Jewish and Christian mystics would talk about joy as even when you're wallowing in the worst pain, but you have a sense of God's presence. So it really depends on what we're talking about. And both of those sensations, both of those phenomena, have been extensively studied both by neuroscientists, philosophers, and by social scientists. But that's the reason I don't talk about it, because that the poles, they're so radically different across these different definitions. Yeah, thanks for that. We'll take one more. If there's one more, who's got the last question? If they want to weigh in. Clayton, we may not have one more.
That's what happens when you say there's one more, then there are no more.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I've just scared everybody off. All right. My friends, I would love to hear back from you on anything that you're thinking about. What an honor it is for me to be at this great college. If I can provide any resources for you, I can tell you very much that you're providing resources for me by giving me this opportunity. I hope this has brought you some ideas about happiness, and I hope that, most importantly, you'll cement in these ideas, you'll make them metacognitive by sharing them with other people. Doing that would be an honor for me, and I dare say it would be even better for all of us, because sharing the ideas of love are what actually can make our world that much better. And I now leave this information in your hands. Thank you.